At its peak, the Cobb Group exceeded $20 million in annual revenues and employed over 150 people. The company was successfully sold to Ziff Communications Company in 1991 for 200 times the return for its founding investors. That's quite a return, isn't it? After successfully selling the Cobb Group, Doug then co-founded Chrysalis Ventures, which is my former employer, a Louisville-based venture capital fund. And as of 2017, Chrysalis Ventures has invested in over 65 companies, primarily in healthcare and technology. In 2000, Doug was recruited as the CEO of Appriss, and Appriss was one of the portfolio companies of Chrysalis Ventures at that time. His arrival at that company spurred growth in an equity capital raise at the rate of $14 million. And before retiring as CEO of Appriss in 2010, he designed the company's recurring revenue business model, which amounted to an excess of $50 million. Doug remains on the company's board of directors today, and currently Doug serves as the entrepreneur in residence with Chrysalis Ventures. I like that title, Doug. It's my title, too. And he serves on the boards of several companies, including Complete Set LLC and Edge Analytics, which is on the back of this program. Doug was most recently one of the inductees into the Kentucky Entrepreneurship Hall of Fame. And so with that, I would like to invite Doug Cobb up here to tell us his entrepreneurial story. Doug.
Thank you, Suzanne. You know, it's really impressive. I'm amazed at this gathering. I'm just so impressed with all of you being assembled here. My best wishes to the teams for great success. I wish you all could win, but that's part of the process, right? You compete. I know my friend Bob Taylor would be delighted to see this. Back before any of us could spell entrepreneurship, Bob was the guy who was, you know, singing this song and preaching this sermon for entrepreneurship as the right strategy for economic development for a city like Louisville, Kentucky. So I'm a Bob Taylor disciple. Bob's the reason Van's here. He hired him. We all walk in his shoes. So I know he'd be delighted to see, you know, what his vision has, one part of what his vision has produced here. You also need to know how affectionate I am toward the University of Louisville. It's at this level of affection. I wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the University of Louisville. My dad and mom are here. My dad came to Louisville from Durham, North Carolina, because the Navy said, that's where you're going to go to college. I don't know if you could have found Louisville on a map before that. My mom came to this university because she lived in Louisville, and this is what her family could afford for her to do. They met, and the rest is history. So they have been longtime good friends of the university, and they're great mom and dad too, so I'm glad you guys are here today. So I was asked to talk for a few minutes about some of the things I've learned in almost 35 years of entrepreneurial endeavors. And there are maybe three main things I want to talk about, and then I'll try to leave some time at the end for questions if anybody has questions. You know, my career has been a blessing. It has proceeded in ways that I could have never imagined. I started my first business when I was 27 in 1984. I know that's way before many of you were born, but you know, we actually had computers then and stuff. That business was a newsletter publishing company. That kind of dates it right there, right? You know, publishing actual physical paper newsletters for people who were trying to learn to use software, desktop software. So we published newsletters about Lotus 1-2-3 and Microsoft Word and WordPerfect, some things that don't even exist anymore. And you know, my motto for that company was, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. You know, we didn't have to know much. We just had to know a little bit more than everybody else, and people would pay us good money to teach them the little bit more that we knew. That business was successfully sold. That, you know, I figured if running one company was fun, then having a portfolio of them would be even more fun. So I approached my friend David Jones Jr., and we started Chrysalis in 1994. That business continues today. I haven't been active in it for a long time. I have Suzanne's title, entrepreneur in residence. That means they let me hang out and do stuff, right? I assume you must get paid a little bit for yours. I don't get paid anything for mine, but yeah, just a bit. So, that business has been great. That's led to a number of other things. Over the years, I've been able to be involved with companies that have had 5 successful exits. So the Cobb Group, the original one, and then a company that we helped found through Chrysalis, and then I ran for a while, Apris, actually 2 through that one so far, 2 exits. And then some companies that I was able to be involved with on the board, Summit Energy, which is now Schneider Electric here in town, Genscape, company in California called Golden State Overnight. So I've been around this track a few times. So let me tell you three things that I've kind of learned from those things. First thing, I just was thinking about this, the importance of business model in your entrepreneurial endeavor. Now, one thing we see a lot these days, I don't know if you're noticing this, but there's a ton of innovation taking place where really the only innovation, a ton of entrepreneurship, where really the only innovation is an innovation around business model. So for instance, I don't know if you heard these ads on radio for these luxury sheets that you buy direct from the manufacturer, right? And they promote those. Well, I mean, the only innovation that I can see in that business is that they just are skipping Macy's and Bloomingdale's and making a direct to the customer business model and leveraging radio and the internet as a marketing tool, right? So it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but they seem like they're producing a heck of a company around that. And it's almost always true that there is room in any business to innovate around business model. Even in higher education, you see it, for instance, right? Online education, new models of, breaking away from the old semester model to, student-paced education. There's always room to just tinker with the model. But when you're starting a new business, very often you have the opportunity to decide what business model you would like to adopt. And it can make a big difference. Let me tell you a story about that from the early days of Apris. Apris is a company that was created to do a very unusual service. The founding principle of Apris was a service to notify victims of crime when the bad people who had hurt them were going to be released from jail. The primary users of the service were victims of domestic violence, mostly women, whose attackers had been put in jail, who had said, as they were being dragged off to jail, when I get out, I'm going to come and I'm really going to hurt you. And the last thing they wanted to have happen was to meet that man on the street or have him come to the house without their knowledge that he'd been released. Up to the point that Apris was launched, there was really no way for the criminal justice community to be able to inform people that that transaction was taking place, that a man who had been in jail was to be released. And it's a great service. In fact, Apris has gone on, does that in almost every state now. Almost every jail in the country has that service called Vine. When we originally were talking about that business, the idea was that we would put a computer in every jail that would make these telephone calls to victims to let them know that their attacker had been released. And so there would have been a big capital spend in every jail. There would have been cost of local phone lines in every jail. It would have been sold on a one-time fixed price basis. That would have been that. And when I met with Mike and Jung, the founders of the company, Jung Nguyen, another U of L graduate, by the way, we started to think about, could we do this as a centralized service where all the data would come back to Louisville and all the telephone calls would be originated from Louisville. Now, this was in 1994 when there was still like the concept of long distance, right? You paid extra for long distance, and we were, kind of scared by that, but we thought, all this fiber's getting laid, the cost of that has to be coming down and down. And maybe if we do the business that way, instead of selling it as a one-time sale with a kind of a maintenance fee, we can do it as an annual recurring service fee to be connected to this network. Now, that's called software as a service, right? Everybody knows what that's called. We didn't know it was software as a service then. Nobody had come up with that name, but we kind of pioneered that idea for that business. The difference for that business was, instead of being a few single-digit of millions of dollars of revenue business, just the Vine service alone ended up being about a $30 million business with a recurring revenue model, which generated a lot of value and generated a lot of cash flow that the company has now used to leverage into other things. So the point of that story is to say, the choice of how we organized and sold the business, how we structured the business model, made all the difference in the value that was created in the company. So when you're starting, you want to be sure you make that choice well. Another story in that regard, my first company, the Cobb Group, we originally were a multimedia publishing company. We had newsletters and we had books that we wrote and sold. If you compare those two businesses, one of them is almost the best business that anybody's ever invented, and one of them is close to the worst. In the newsletter business, you have direct contact with your customers. It's recurring. They renew annually if you do a good job. They pay you in advance for what they buy. You realize that's what you're doing every time you subscribe to a magazine or a website, right? You are paying in advance for what you're going to use. There aren't very many businesses where people pay in advance. And when people pay in advance, you get their cash to use for a year while you're fulfilling the service, as opposed to waiting, doing all the work, and then getting paid. In the book business, on the other hand, you sell through distributors who sell to bookstores, who sell to customers. Everybody steps on your price, so you get a discounted price against the the retail price. They can return the books if they don't sell them, so you don't know when you're actually done. You have no direct contact with your customers at all. It's a working capital nightmare on your balance sheet. One day, Tom Cottingham and I were sitting looking at each other, wondering what we should do with the business, and I think he was the one who said, I think we should get out of the book business altogether and just do newsletters. He said, because we really like that business and that other one's pretty crappy, you know. We did it. We sold that business inside of about 6 weeks to Microsoft Press. We took the money that we got from doing that, invested in the newsletter business. In 1 year's time, we went from 30,000 subscribers to over 100,000 subscribers. And in the next year, we doubled again from 100 to 200,000. It just showed, the value of picking one business model. So the lesson is, think hard about what your business model is going to be. It can make a big difference in how your business goes. A second and related thing, this probably is the song I sing the most to young entrepreneurs, is the importance of focus. The importance of focus. It is a common problem of startup entrepreneurs and startup businesses that they try to do too much, too many things for too many people at the beginning. And I liken it to trying to, you're in a battle situation and you're trying to win some high ground. The more high ground you try to win, the less likely you are to win any of it. Your best strategy as a startup almost always is to pick one hill that you really like and you think you can conquer and put all of your effort into winning that hill. Once you've won that hill, then you've got the opportunity to think about the next one and the next one. You can go on, but trying to do 2 or 3 at the beginning is really difficult. I've seen this come up a couple of times in businesses that I'm involved with. I'm on the board of a company in Nashville called My Health Direct. It's a physician appointment scheduling program. We serve some of the bigger both health systems and health plans in the United States with the service. But at the beginning, one of the problems with the service was it could be used to do so many different things that when we would call on a customer, we'd spend all our time brainstorming about all the different ways they might use it, and we would miss finding one way that they would use it, right? Have you read The Paradox of Choice? It's a really important book that you want to understand if you're a marketer. The idea is that the more things you give people to decide between, the less likely they are to pick any one of them, right? So it's better to go in my experience, with a pitch and say, this is what we can do for you. And when they say, well, how about this? You say, well, maybe, but this is what we can do for you. And either they say yes or they say no, and you move on to the next customer, because you can waste a lot of time and energy trying to be all things to all people. I told you the Cobb Group story about being in the book business and the newsletter business We were also in the training course business and the workbook product. I mean, we did everything. That if you wanted to learn about a computer or software program, we would try to teach you. But really, we struggled until we decided that we were just going to be a newsletter company. And once we said, all our wood is behind that one arrow, that's what we are, suddenly everything started to work for us. I had to learn that lesson twice. You know, there's no shame in learning a lesson once. The second time, it's a little embarrassing, right? When I went to Appriss to be the CEO, it was the year 2000. Again, many of you don't remember the year 2000, but in the year 2000, everything that anybody tried was going to work. That was the internet. That was the first internet bubble, right? Everything was going to work. Some of the silliest ideas you've ever seen were briefly worth many hundreds of million or billions of dollars. It was nuts, right? And everybody was falling in. I mean, money was so easy to get. People would invest, you know, on the craziest stuff. And, you know, we took Appriss. We had this notification platform for victim notification. Well, we thought that could be applied to all kinds of things. When your flight was going to be late, you know, you need to get a notification. Believe it or not, that didn't used to happen. And, you know, if your doctor had to change the appointment, we could, I mean, just, you know, think about all the different things you could, you know, stand to get a notification about. Well, we put a business plan together for that. We raised a bunch of money to do that. We hired a bunch of people to do it. It didn't help that just about the time we raised the money, everything started to go like this. Go back and look at the NASDAQ was at 5,400, I think, at the peak in 2000, 2001, and ended at the bottom was at about 1,600. So it fell by 2/3. Okay, that's a pretty tough market environment, right? Pretty tough. We ended up a year later having to shut down all of that new stuff, having to let go a lot of those good people. It was one of the hardest experiences of my business life. Doing layoffs is no fun. And we ended up being the company that we had been at the beginning, which was a government service victim notification company. And guess what? It started to work again because we picked one thing where we had high ground. Now, obviously, the agonizing part of this is, what do you pick, right? Because if you've got 3 or 4 good things you might do, and you're only going to do one of them, you have to choose. And that's a very, very complicated process, one that it's worth spending a lot of time and asking a lot of people's opinions about. But the real question for me always would come down to, where did I think I could win? You know, where were my chances of winning the highest? Let's go after that thing. Sometimes it's influenced by, if we won it, what would be the best one to win, right? That's another way to think about it. But you want to maximize your chances for success. So, you know, number 1 is the importance of business model. Number 2 is the importance of focus. Pick one thing and make that your main thing. The third thing that I would tell you about is the importance of partnership. And this is a personal lesson, kind of, but it's an important one, because when I look back on my career, it seems like this has always been the way that it's worked. I was really fortunate when we started the Cobb Group to recruit a guy named Tom Cottingham to come work with us. We kind of thought of Tom originally as a head of our sales and marketing effort, but Tom eventually became my right arm, my business partner. Tom's gone on to a great career here in Louisville with several other entrepreneurial businesses. He's a good friend. But Tom was the guy who could say to me, "That is the dumbest idea I have ever heard." And he did, with great frequency, say that to me. And I, with great frequency, said that to Tom as well. And the result of that criticism of each other's ideas was occasionally, between the two of us, we would come up with a really good idea. You know, move ahead to Chrysalis. I told you when we started the Chrysalis Ventures, the first thing I did was invite my friend Dave Jones Jr. over. I can still remember sitting around the breakfast room table at our house and saying, "Man, practicing law can't be that much fun. Let's start a venture capital." Yeah, I was a good salesman, and you know, it took him a little time to decide, but eventually that's what we did, and we started Chrysalis. David, the same way, was a thought partner, you know, for whom, you know, I knew he would always give me the right answers when I needed them, right? If I was off the mark or if I wasn't thinking about something quite clearly. And then I go to Appriss after a few years. Mike Davis and Yung Win found that company. They grow it. It's at about 10 million of revenue in the year 2000, and is often the case in entrepreneurial companies with inexperienced management. The wheels were starting to wobble, and there was some risk that they were about to fall off, right? We were moving really fast, and so, now I get to play the role of the old experienced guy, right? Coming in and helping the younger entrepreneurs. As we worked on the company, Yung moved on to some other things. Mike stayed and filled that role again for me as as my number two, as my right arm, as my business partner. And again, he was the guy who would either come to me and say, "We got to try this. Let's, here's a good idea," or would say, "No, that's dumb. We don't need to be doing that." What's really fun about Appriss, just as an aside, is that I don't know many stories like this, but so 2000, I go to be the CEO. Mike's the founder. He steps down from the CEO role. I serve as CEO for 10 years until 2010, and when I leave, Mike stepped back into the role of being the CEO of the company and continues in that role today. The company is doing enormously well. It's one of the real entrepreneurial success stories of Louisville in the last couple of decades. It may not get quite as much publicity as it should, but there's about 600 employees out there, I think, and 100 million of revenue or more, and so it's really going great. I'm really so proud of Mike, though, because most people can't stand the ego blow of stepping down, and then most people don't learn enough to step back in, right? It's and all of the credit for that goes to Mike for being able to do that. But here's the point. None of us is as smart as all of us, right? There's a real problem for entrepreneurs that we think we always are right about stuff. Does that ever happen to any of our entrepreneurial friends here, right? I mean, the very thing that gets us into this game, right, that we have this kind of insane confidence that somehow we're going to do what nobody else has ever done before, also can be one of our great weaknesses, right? Because we think we won't make a mistake or that our judgments are always going to be right. And trust me, that is not true, right? You need somebody who can tell you the truth. Maybe a business partner. For me, that's been the model. Maybe it's a mentor. Maybe it's a close board member. Maybe it's members of your team. There's different ways to do that. But if you don't have that, your chances of making a big mistake, it seems like to me, go way up. By the way, it doesn't save you from making mistakes. There were many times I can think of for both Tom and Mike where we would look at each other and say, "Yeah, that's great," and we were both wrong, right? So you don't always get it right, but it sure helps you get it right more often than not. So 3 things from 35 years: pay attention to your business model, pick it well. Focus, 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 and find somebody who will tell you the truth. Those would be three lessons that I would share with you this morning. And I think that leaves us with maybe 10 minutes or so for Q&A, which I'd be happy to answer if anybody has. If anything I've said stimulated a thought or a question, or if anybody wants to ask a question about any of the companies along the way, I'd be happy to answer any of those. Everybody's eager to get to the judging, man. It's like, am I going to win this thing? Yes, sir. Oh, my goodness. Well, if I'd known the internet was coming, I wouldn't have sold the Cobb group. And that just shows, what you don't know, right? But we sold that business in 1991, just a couple of years too soon, right? And, obviously as an internet business, that model would have been unbelievable. It would have been really, really a fantastic business. And we would have been beneficiaries of that 2000, everything's worth $1 billion thing. I don't know if it would have been worth $1 billion, but it would have been worth a lot. So it was a great exit. We were happy about it. It launched all the rest of the stuff. So I'm not crying about it, but that would be fun. Let me think if there's anything else that comes to mind. I mean, there have been some investments that we've made that were just really, really dumb, And, they never look dumb when you're looking ahead. They only look dumb when you're looking back, right? There's something you say, yeah, we didn't pay attention to that, or we rationalize that, right? We saw that, but we pretended like that wouldn't be important. And so you wish you didn't have those. But I don't think there's any way to avoid that. When you're investing in startups, they're just, you're gonna, if you can hit, if half of them work, that's fantastic, right? I mean, so you're gonna have a bunch of those where you look back. You just want to learn from them, right? Don't make this, like me, having to learn the focus lesson twice, try not to do that, right? Learn your lessons well so you don't have to learn them again. Yes? That's a great question. I do some angel investing these days and have done some recently. I don't do it at the level of intensity that I did for a while because I just don't have as much time to devote to it. One of the rules I've set for myself in that is that I just don't invest in anything that I don't understand, right? And that excludes huge swaths of things from my investing. I've never done anything in medical technology or drugs or therapies because I just don't understand that. Plus that whole regulatory black box just freaks me out, right? Like, so we can work really hard at this and some guy gets to decide whether we get to keep going forward or not, right? I just don't like that. So I tend to invest in things that are business services or technology enabled services that I can understand. And if I can understand the business and get a sense, my sort of the way my mind works, I read the plan and I'll say, that makes sense to me. That could work, right? People could use that. It makes sense that would work. Then, I think a second thing for me is working with people that I respect and like, right? There are huge numbers of opportunities to get involved with people, and life's heartaches are often because you make wrong choices in that, right? And wouldn't it be nice if we always got those things right? We don't. But you try at the beginning to pick people that you think are hardworking and have high integrity and are going to be enjoyable to be with, right? Because, when you're involved in a startup, I've yet to have one that worked the way we thought it would work, right? There's always that moment when the bombs are falling and, you think, oh my gosh, this is the end. And if you're in that place, you want to be there with somebody you enjoy being with, right? And so, I haven't always been perfect at that, but that would be two, things I understand, the limited things I understand. It seems like, by the way, as you get older, that's less and less, right? You'd think you'd get smarter and smarter. No, what happens is people come up with all kinds of new things that you just, you're not comfortable with, and then picking people you really like. Thank you. That's a great question. Anything else? Yes, sir. Well, I jokingly tell my wife I'm the busiest retired guy I know, right? I serve on the boards of 4 or 5 early stage companies. That's fun. I spend a lot of time on various Christian ministry things at my church and internationally. That's taking more and more time, and that's really fun work. I really enjoy that. I like to try to get to my farm a day or two a week to play around, to break things and fix them, and that's therapeutic. And so I'm not sure there's a new thing, but I just hope more of the same things to come. Thank you for asking that question, though. Van's giving me the hook here, so it looks like it's time. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Doug. I know that I got inspired to leave teaching and become an entrepreneur again. So. We have a couple of mementos for you, and I want to share those with you now. The students who are here will appreciate that you get your own Louisville Slugger.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for that.
That's terrific. Thank you.
And we have this for you, too.
Thank you, Van.
So once again, a big round of applause for Sheila.
Thanks.
My relationship with the Cobb name goes back a long way. When we first started our Entrepreneurship MBA program, and that was 24 cohorts ago, we were able to convince Doug to come in and team teach that first cohort of students. And another very successful entrepreneur in Louisville came out of that cohort. And we were just reminiscing a little bit before we, came in here about how valuable having Doug's real world application alongside my some real world but also academic application. And we've continued that model throughout our Entrepreneurship MBA program. And all of that was made possible by Doug's parents. We're fortunate today to have Ann and Stuart Cobb with us. They actually endowed the position that I hold now. It's the Cobb Family Professor of Entrepreneurship. And that gave us the resources for our then dean to say, Van, we really want you to concentrate on entrepreneurship, because I was doing all kinds of things back then, teaching principles of management and business strategy, and I loved all of that. But with that endowment, Bob Taylor said, okay, for the rest of your time here at Louisville, we want you to focus just on entrepreneurship. And he also empowered us in the entrepreneurial group to create new things. So we now have a minor in entrepreneurship at the undergraduate level. We have the Entrepreneurship MBA, which is our best known program. We also have a PhD in entrepreneurship. So those of you out there that are thinking someday you might like to get a PhD, you can come to Louisville and get a PhD from the school that is probably one of the top 3 or 4 schools in the world developing future scholars in entrepreneurship. So Stuart, I would like for you just to stand, you too, Ann, just so the crowd can recognize you. And Stuart, Claire is bringing your own personalized Louisville Slugger.